Hello and welcome to a brand new Arseblog Arsecast right here on arseblog.com. How are you? I hope you're well. Thank you very much indeed, as always, for being here. We have got Champions League action, relatively uncomplicated Champions League action to get our teeth into today. For the second successive game in Europe this season, Arsenal came out on top 2-0. Winners, of course. After doing that to Athletic Club in Bilbao a couple of weeks ago, Olympiacos were the visitors last night to the Emirates, and it looked like it was a game we might kind of run away with a bit. But as ever with this team, with Olympiacos, things turned out to be not quite as simple as they seemed. While Arsenal probably should have done better in certain areas, there were moments of danger from the Greek side too. David Raya in action. So we'll talk about all of that on today's show. I think there's some interesting conversations to be had about a couple of players in particular, and what last night told us about this continued squad depth discussion that has been part of the Arsenal discourse since the start of the season, but certainly over the last couple of weeks it's come to the fore because Mikel Arteta has changed his team around and got results with those teams. And this is one of the areas, I think, when people were assessing the manager going into this season, they wanted to see him do this and they wanted to see him do it effectively. Early days still, of course, but so far, so good, I think, in the grand scheme of things. I did enjoy, by the way, on TNT Sports afterwards, Martin Keown mixing his metaphors a little bit when he was talking about that Arsenal performance. Here's what he had to say.
If it was a game of chess, then it's game, set and match to Arsenal.
We cross now to the World Chess Championships with Magnus Carlsen about to serve.
Look, you can't be serious, man. You cannot be serious! That ball was on the line. Chalk flew up.
Well, you know what they say. You've got to get your bishop to second base before you can birdie a hat-trick in the line-out. So I think there's a lesson there for all of us. Right, let's get on with today's show. And with me to look back at last night's 2-0 win over Olympiacos and more is Tim Stillman. Good morning, Tim.
Good morning.
I heard you on Arsenal Vision talk about how after the opening 6 games of the season, well, you know, not including the cup games, there was a level of complication to our fixture list. And you were talking about how you were looking forward to maybe this one being relatively an easier night, let's say. We could get a couple of goals and win this game relatively comfortably. It wasn't quite that, but also I think it's one of those games that when you're a good team, and Arsenal are a good team, in the grand scheme of things, it sort of goes down as routine because we kind of do this a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the. I think we're just, because of the schedule and the fixture list, we're getting more games like this now that are just basically completely forgettable. It actually reminded me a little bit of the Port Vale game, maybe, in that we kind of went 1-0 up quite early. You felt like we were going to build on that and you thought, okay, this is going to be 3 or 4-0. It doesn't quite happen. And then you get that kind of anxiety that maybe it's becoming too easy and the team starts sleepwalking a little bit. And it was reasonably edgy until that late goal. And obviously, I think Olympiacos have a lot more quality than Port Vale as well. So sure. I think it's just one of those games you're going to see a lot with this kind of increased Champions League. And because of the economic advantage a team like Arsenal has, they can make 6 changes and really they can still win at 70%. So they'll take that option. Yeah. I don't think for one second Mikel Arteta told the team to do that. I'm pretty sure the plan was probably more, let's be 2 or 3 goals up reasonably early. Maybe then we don't even have to use players like Saka and Rice. We can perhaps, reach into the bench for like a Gy&ouml or a Nwaneri or something. And I'm sure that maybe privately Arteta was not annoyed, but hoping not to have to use some of those players at all. But I just think this is kind of modern football now. And it really reminded me of, I was going to say, do you remember? I imagine most of the listeners won't even remember. We played Shakhtar at home like October last year, and we won 1-0 and it was dreadful. And there wasn't really any real danger of us not winning, but while it's 1-0, it's a little bit edgy. And yeah, this is just one of those games that in 2 to 3 weeks nobody will remember and think about again, because football is just becoming so packed that you just get a lot of forgettable games now.
So funny what you're saying. We played Shakhtar, and immediately, if my mind was a fishing line, I was throwing it back fucking 15, 20 years going, which I know Tim's got a brilliant memory for these games, but like last year, I can tell you, maybe this says something about me, or it says something about that game, or maybe both. I don't remember it at all. So
no.
that will tell you, that'll tell you something, all right. I mean, he did make changes, and I think this is one of the interesting parts of the Arsenal discussion narrative, however you want to call it this season, is the idea that we have this big squad, we have to rotate, we have to give players chances, however you want to prioritize those things, whether it's about resting players out of a game, whether it's about keeping players on their toes with competition, whether it's about opportunities for certain players, whatever it is. This has been like a thing that people have often spoken about with Mikel Arteta, and his apparent preference for using a very, very small group of players. Personally, I think it's been more a case of circumstance than actual preference. I mean, last season he didn't really have anybody. He talked about that in the press conference afterwards, saying, we had academy kids who'd never played professional football, let alone Champions League games. Previous seasons, you get to the business end of things. I understand slightly the desire to stick with what might be perceived your best 11 or your best 13, 14 players, because literally the stakes are so high. You're going for a title, you're going for a championship. So in the context of that discussion, how have you viewed not just last night where he did make those changes and played, for example, Martinelli on the right, Mikel Merino comes into midfield and does the Declan Rice job, so to speak, I think these are exactly the kind of team selections we should see. Ben White, Miles Lewis-Skelly coming in. Absolutely. This is what we should doing. Or this is what we should be doing. Over the course of the opening weeks of the season, do you think it's been effective? And in terms of last night, it produced decent displays from some of those players. And, as we look forward at what's to come, this is something he's going to have to maintain, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. This to me is like the final stage, really, of the kind of evolution of Arsenal under Mikel Arteta, where the team gets a bit better, then the bench gets a bit better, and now we're at a stage where we've got guys sometimes who can't even get on the bench, who are really, really good players. And I think the biggest kind of testament you can pay to that is some of the players we've been missing in massive games in the first kind of 6 weeks of the season, and it barely warrants discussion. It's barely discussed that we're playing like a team like Liverpool without Saka, for example, like the hardest fixture of the season. No Saka, no Havertz, which is a position we were in last season, and look at the players that were sometimes having to step in those scenarios, and like missing a player like Odegaard, who I know we'll talk about. Like, I think that's been under-discussed, undervalued, how much we miss a player like that because really good players come in. And you look at someone like, we had a discussion on Arsenal Vision over the summer looking at Mikel Merino, and we were like, if there aren't injuries, is he going to play? Is he going to get on the bench? I always thought he'd have a role to play, but he's had like quite a big role to play. Even players like Trossard and Martinelli, who a lot of us, I think understandably, were ready to write off. Players we've had for a while. We bought new attackers, new shiny attackers that we really like, which we had to do and was overdue. But players like Trossard and Martinelli, they're still highly involved in this team. And I think that's one of the things that Arteta's managed really well is that kind of gentle rotation piece, that kind of, we'll change 2 or 3 players and nobody will really talk about it because we can do that. And we'll have different substitutes for different games. And like even Nwaneri not getting on the bench against Newcastle, I'm sure the conversation there was, well, actually, we've got Merino and Odegaard on the bench, and this is a tough away game, so frankly, we probably will be on. But there'll be another game in a week or two where we can, and because that's the skill of it as well. It's not just the resting players and promoting competition and things like that. It's also about making everyone feel involved. And it feels like at the moment that everyone is. Like, I'm not looking at any players and thinking, oh, like that player just can't get on the pitch. Like, it feels like everyone's involved. It doesn't feel or look like we've got like players who just can't even get off the bench. So it's really, really healthy. I think Arteta would have wanted this for a long, long time. It takes a long, long time. You can't fix all of your problems at once. And
sure.
This is, like I said, I feel like the final stage. And I know James has made this point on the Arsecast Extra as well. It almost feels like this is probably as good as it's ever going to be depth-wise, because we'll probably get really, really good players who are a bit like, I could probably start for most teams every week, but I can't here. So, I think one of the things maybe Arsenal did last season was just underestimate what the Champions League expansion meant. Going to the Carabao Cup semi-final, I think in hindsight was terrible for our season. We didn't have the squad to manage those games, I don't think. I think we do now. If we got to a Carabao Cup semi-final, pretty much whoever we played, I'd feel comfortable going with players like Merino and, Hincapi and, all those kind of depth players who I just wouldn't bat an eyelid if they were starting games. Yeah,
there was a great shot in the towards the end of the game on TV. You probably wouldn't have seen it, but in the tunnel, Havertz, Madueke, Hincapié, Gabriel Jesus, these guys who are out and not available even to be in the squad. And then you look at the bench last night and you're thinking, fuck, that is a hell of a bench. That is not the sort of double-barreled academy kid bench that we saw, too often last season.
And actually the academy has made our squad a lot deeper as well, because in the last year we've had 3 kids come through who've made that squad even bigger that we haven't gone out and bought. And a couple of them are probably ahead of schedule as well. So that's like someone like Max Dowman, for example, that's made the squad deeper too.
Sure. So look, let's talk a little bit about the game before we circle back around to some individuals and some players and performances. And listen, we should have been ahead much sooner than we were. Gabriel Martinelli had a great chance. One of those where he goes with his head, it sort of came off his shoulder and went wide. But an interesting move, interesting piece of movement from him. Typically he's deployed on the right-hand side, but there's been this discussion about him in central areas. What can he do in central areas? And it's not just about, let's say, bombing down the middle of the pitch, being set free against the defence that's pushed high. I thought this was interesting movement from him. I think he should have scored. But he did get the goal, and it came from Martin Odegaard playing a pass through to Viktor Gyokeres. And it's a good pass, but I also think you have to give a lot of credit to Gyokeres for the persistence, for the strength, for the power that he showed to hold off 2 defenders, 2 fairly decent defenders too, because, he got another buffeting last night. I think after the game he played against Newcastle. He's going to have some bruises, I think, this weekend, but I get the sense that that's kind of the game he relishes. There's a sort of bull in a china shop element to the way that he plays the game. He got a shot away. Another night, that just sort of trickles over the line and it's a goal for Gyokeres, and we're talking about him, but it didn't hit the post. Gabriel Martinelli alive, aware, and there just to stick it home from close range.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing, and we did see this, I think, a little bit at the end of last season when Saka came back from injury. We saw him taking up much more central positions and coming in off the line quite a bit more. And I think we're seeing that with Martinelli as well. If you look back at the move where we win the penalty that is then overturned against Newcastle, like Saka's up front when that ball comes over the top. Like, he's way away from the right wing. And we saw Martinelli take up those positions last night. I don't know if maybe the right-hand side has a bit more freedom to do that than the left. I'd have to look slightly closer at that. But then, like, when Trossard's been playing on the left, like at Newcastle, I could really see... I thought Lewis Ambrose's piece was actually brilliant on that Newcastle game, and it really showed why Trossard was selected to kind of come in field and almost act as another midfielder, rather than keeping the game out wide, which is, I think, certainly happened to us against Newcastle a few times last season, but maybe happened too often last season where everything was just going down the touchline. And it feels like players have got a bit more freedom maybe to come in off that line. But also I think Gyokeres is a big part of that, because what I loved about his last two performances, you know, we've talked a lot about how we get him in on goal and how we get him goal scoring opportunities, which is a very valid discussion. But I think what we're starting to find out is that he can draw defenders to him. That, you know, get the ball up to him and he's like a sponge. He'll absorb some physical punishment, but it will take two guys with him. So you can go and run off him. I think that's maybe a penny that started to drop with some of these players. It's a bit like, okay, we can post up to this guy. We can, you know, feed him, as it were. And then he's going to have like two defenders all over his back. And that means there's one less defender on me, type thing. And that's the thing that I think we're really beginning to work out with Gyokeres up front. And one of the things I remember saying when Havertz got injured was that maybe the advantage here is that we learn to play with Gyokeres much more quickly. Not to say that was going to happen straight away, sure. But now where he's had 5, 6, 7 games back to back, like the speed with which the team understands this player is probably like this is probably we probably would have come to this stage maybe a month or two later if him and Havertz had been rotating, which I still think would have been preferable. But it's been like one of the advantages, I think, and I think what you're really beginning to see with the deployment of the wide players is, you know, Arteta's treating this squad like a toolbox. You know, so it's like sometimes it's Nwaneri that comes on, sometimes it's Merino, sometimes we want someone to play in off the line a little bit, so it's Trossard. Sometimes we really want to stretch, so it's Martinelli. Like it feels like Arteta's team selections are very driven by attributes, actually, which is a really positive space to be in.
Yeah, I mean, while we're talking about Gyokeres, I was going to discuss him a little bit, and I have to say, in the last couple of games, you know, when we signed him and when we were talking about signing him, all the discussion was that he's not a hold-up guy. He's not a guy who plays with his back to goal. He's a guy who you want to get running through on goal. And I think, obviously, that is the preference, right? That is what you would like him to do more often than not. But I've been quite, not surprised, but impressed a little bit by his hold-up play in the Newcastle game. Listen, we know what they're about. They're a big, big physical team, and they'll whack you. And if you're a centre forward and you've got two central defenders coming through your back, it's tough going, you know, because you're getting elbows and knees and all kinds. It's a tough gig. He did well at Newcastle, I think. And I think last night as well, there were moments where he did receive the ball either in the channels or with his back to goal slightly. There was one moment, I can't remember if it was first half or second half, where, I think it was second, where we played the ball down the left-hand side and he held it up in the box and then played this really smart little flick to Trossard, who tried to cross to Martinelli at the back post, overhit the cross. But that sort of subtlety in his game, I wasn't necessarily expecting, and there are elements to his game which are not at all subtle. Let's be clear about that. You know, like I said, there's a touch of bull in a china shop. But what I think I am taking from the last two games, the last two performances, is a player who understands his role maybe a little bit better, and the players around him, as you said, understand what he brings a little bit better, and we're starting to see relationships build. And obviously we'll bring this around to Martin Odegaard now in a minute, but we're starting to see connection between him and the rest of the team, where perhaps in the opening weeks of the season you were looking at him as this kind of, he was almost distinct. It's an Arsenal team with a striker, a real striker. How do they combine? And it's not to say we didn't in those opening games, but I think what you can see over the last two performances is that it looks a lot more natural than it did in some of the early weeks.
Yeah, definitely. And there are a couple of reasons I liked this signing. And I've seen a lot of, again, really valid discussion about the player online, maybe some of his weaknesses and, you know, is this, and I completely understood and maybe even felt myself a little bit of that kind of Lacazette anxiety, that kind of like, this feels a bit like Lacazette as a signing, who wasn't a terrible signing by any means, but just wasn't quite that elite level striker, and you could kind of see why he hadn't been taken out of Ligue 1 a little bit earlier, but we just got to a stage where we had to buy somebody up front, and it felt like that's what happened this summer. We just got way past the stage where we could be very picky about it. It's like we have to sign someone to play in this position, and if they're not perfect, we kind of have to eat that a little bit. So there are definitely rough edges to his game, and there was definitely risk in this signing, but I think it all comes down to what's going on around you, and I think in this team we can absorb some rough edges because we don't really have them elsewhere. I don't think.
Sure.
I think we're technically like such a proficient kind of team, full of ballers, as it were, and we bought a couple of others to go in the attack this summer. So I kind of think we can use a battering ram who perhaps, like there were times last night he took on a shot when he should have passed. There are times perhaps with his finishing where you think, maybe you don't need to like belt the back of the ball and you can maybe finesse it into the corner.
Sure.
But like we've got a lot of finesses, so like I feel like we can absorb a bit of a battering ram who perhaps doesn't always have the perfect touch, perhaps shoots when he should pass. I feel like we almost need that, and you can see it in the profile of the attackers we signed this summer. We signed 3 attackers, and they all have that in very different ways. They have that directness about them. So you can see that Arteta has seen what we all saw last season, that we lacked that a little bit. We lacked a little bit of that directness. We lacked depth, definitely. And that we needed, guys who can get through defences in other ways. And he's definitely got a lot of rough edges. He's not perfect. I think in other, like if we'd signed him like 5 years ago, for example, maybe when we weren't as good a team, then maybe I think this is a signing that might not have worked, but I feel like this is almost like a final jigsaw piece.
Sure.
And I think when Havertz comes back, by the way, I think there'll be like a pretty firm rotation between those 2 players. I think there are games Gyokeres has played in the last few weeks that he wouldn't have started if we'd had Havertz as well. Like I do see those 2 as a bit of a combo in terms of, again, picking for attributes for certain games. But I feel like we just needed that profile somewhere. And I think we could swallow the fact that maybe you don't want to pay that much for a 27-year-old who's come from Portugal and doesn't have the perfect touch and all of that.
Sure. I mean, I think you're absolutely right about Havertz, because if Mikel Arteta is at this point prepared to rotate William Saliba and Gabriel for Christian Mosquera, there's no question that he will rotate and keep things fresh with Havertz and Gyokeres, not least because they do different things and bring different qualities. And I think that's another aspect to the summer business. When you look at the profile of attackers, and not just attackers, some of the defenders as well, there's a profile there that gives you different qualities for different game states or different opposition, whatever that might be. Again, really early days. But can we connect the dots a little bit between Martin Odegaard's best performance in an Arsenal shirt for quite a while and the fact that we have a striker like Gyokeres who is prepared to run the channels in a way? I'm not being critical of Havertz. He just plays the game a little bit differently. He's not the guy really who will run in behind, although I say that and I can remember that brilliant goal he scored against Chelsea doing exactly that. But the stylistic comparison, if you want to call it that, between him and Gyokeres is quite different. It was a brilliant pass from Odegaard to put Gyokeres through down that inside left channel. I've already talked about the one that led to the goal. It was a great pass from Odegaard there as well. But that sort of deep pass around the defender, maybe this is one of those where you're saying he took the shot when he could have actually squared it for Martinelli for a tap in, but strikers, as we know, are greedy, and we've often bemoaned Arsenal attackers who get into positions and then cut back and try and find the perfect opportunity for somebody else. So that balance is an interesting thing. But I do think there's something to that combination you know, if you're a creative player like Odegaard, if you've got the vision and if you've got the ability, the quality to make those kinds of passes, having a player like Gyokeres who, you know, can come deep and hold the ball up, but is also really, really looking to get behind defenders and stretch the game. Listen, it's sort of one great game between the two of them, but I feel like that is a combination that will really start to bear fruit for Arsenal if we can get them on the pitch together on a consistent basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's the beauty of Gyokeres as well. Like, he can pull players away from Odegaard, you know, because you've got to follow that run. And that gives everyone else a little bit more space. And I think one of the interesting things that we've been doing this season, maybe not so much last night, but it feels like we've gone a bit more kind of 4-2-3-1-y, if that makes sense. Like, kind of Rice and Zubimendi's taking on, in some games, like more of a double pivot feel, and it feels like we're playing with a slightly more defined 10, because I was watching Odegaard last night and it didn't feel like, particularly because at the Emirates I sit at the side, I sit in the East stand, so particularly when we attack the North Bank goal, I see Odegaard all the time because he's always on that touchline below me with Saka. Whereas last night, maybe like someone's got an average position map or something that totally proves me wrong. It felt like he was everywhere, basically. It felt a bit more... I mean, I think Odegaard at his best is pretty undefinable as a position. He's not really a 10, he's not really an 8, he's not really a 6. Like, he's all of those things at the same time, simultaneously somehow. And you do sometimes get, like, with Odegaard, you always get the fundamentals. You always get leading the press, the work rate, you know, receiving the ball, not giving it away. Like, even last season, when Odegaard was way below his own personal standard, he was very far from like a nightmare or anything, because his fundamentals are just always very good. So you always get basically a 6 out of 10. But every now and then you get a game from him where he's feeling himself a little bit. And
Sure.
I think last night was one of those games. And I think I just sense like maybe a determination in him, because like and it's too early to say like he's going to have a brilliant season or whatnot. It's like, it's one game. But I was never really worried that last season's form would come into this season. I always felt like this is a serious guy, Odegaard. Like, you can see why Arteta likes him, because I kind of think there may be peas in a pod in that respect. That they're both very serious professional kind of guys. And I always felt that he would know better than anyone that he didn't really do it last season, and that he wouldn't talk, he wouldn't say anything, he'd just go away and kind of work on it. And I just sense a bit of a determination there from him. And I think he's been so missed in this early part of the season because he's such a unique player for us, because he does both sides of the game brilliantly. And I feel like when he's not there, we end up with a kind of a binary choice between someone like Merino, who has his fundamentals but not his creativity, or someone like maybe Nwaneri or even Eze, who has his creativity but maybe not his fundamentals. And I think Havertz is very similar as well, and I kind of think missing both of them at the same time was a real problem for us actually in the early weeks of the season. But yeah, Odegaard was exceptional last night, and he was exceptional when he came on at Newcastle. Even Eddie Howe said afterwards, like, he changed it basically, and he really did. No,
completely agree. And I do, you know, I think there is. Listen, football fans, and it's not to be critical, often have short memories, you know. A player, and you mentioned Martinelli and Trossard, for example, you know, players who were, if not being written off, certainly pushed to the fringes among sections of Arsenal fans, but over the start of this season have demonstrated their value and their worth to the squad. And I think Odegaard's another one who didn't have his best season by any means, but when you look at the numbers and you look at what the lack of consistency that the team suffered from, particularly in the Premier League in the, like, let's say the last quarter of the season, I think it's very much linked to Odegaard's lack of consistency as well. Making up for lost time, you could say as well, because he missed games, and he missed games last season, but also you could say, rising to the challenge? That there are other players who can play in his position now? I think, this time last year, the choice was, it was Nwaneri, or we fudge it a little bit with Merino, but Merino was injured a little bit as well. So, now you've got Nwaneri, you've got Eze, you've got Declan Rice who can play there, you've got Mikel Merino who can play there. There are options, and I do think, one of the aspects of this big squad is who are the players who are going to rise to the challenge, if you like? Who are the players who are really going to thrive on that competition and demonstrate, right, this is fucking my place. I want it. I think Odegaard is one of those. It was always far too reductive to say because he had a bad season, this is the end of Martin Odegaard, because based on what you've seen from him over like the duration of his Arsenal career, a real case of form being temporary and class permanent, I think.
Absolutely. And what you were talking about there, like players striving to keep their places, like that works the other way as well. Like I think Martinelli has been brilliant the last couple of weeks, and his attitude, it would have been very easy, I think, for him to go, oh my God, signed Eze, signed Madueke, that tells me something, and maybe I don't really have a place here anymore, or my role's going to be reduced. And, he always talks well, Martinelli. Like, he's another one who just comes across as a really, really good professional. And lots of players, I remember Declan Rice, when he first came to Arsenal, saying, like, oh, in training, like, Martinelli's the guy that works the hardest, and he's the biggest kind of beast in training. But what we're seeing on the pitch, I think, backs up kind of what we heard from him in interviews, which is, okay, that's the situation. Fine. I'm going to try and contribute, and I'm going to try and fight my way in. And I think that if you told a lot of Arsenal fans, 4 or 5 weeks ago that Martinelli would be featuring this often, I think a lot of people would probably be quite surprised. Even at Newcastle, he came on for Saka when we were losing with 20 minutes to go. That in itself is significant that Arteta was willing to do that, losing pretty much a must-win game 1-0 away from home, and he was comfortable taking Saka off. But that's also because he was comfortable putting Martinelli on. So I think that's going to be the case for a lot of players. I look at someone like Lewis Skelly as well, who's kind of, he's played this game in Port Vale, obviously not playing as much as he did last season, but he's 19, he's got a lot of time, and perhaps he's competing with someone who's been injury prone as well. But even, and I've written about this for the column this week as well, that competition at right back between White and Timber. Ben White has done literally nothing wrong. It's just Jurriën Timber's just been amazing, and we can't take him out for the big games. It's like that's when you've got proper competition in a squad, not when you're not dropping players. Ben White hasn't been dropped. He's done nothing wrong. It's just I can't not select this guy. And I think we've got a lot of that going on around the pitch. It's the same at left back. It's like Miles Lewis-Skelly has done nothing wrong. It's just Calafiori's been so good in these first few weeks of the season, and it's just kind of like that all over the pitch. And even someone like Mikel Merino, who is a player maybe fans struggle to appreciate. He reminds me a bit of Mason Mount. I think he's like a coach's player, But even him, I think he's had because there's been so much debate around him and maybe what he does and doesn't represent, which I completely understand. I still think he's played a really, really strong role in the first couple of weeks of the season. And again, I wasn't sure I could see that 5 or 6 weeks ago. But all of this to me is just so positive because everybody's involved. And so like Declan Rice at Newcastle, one of his best games for Arsenal. I don't even know where he was playing at some points. He was literally just everywhere. And when we've been chasing goals in the last 2 league games, Arteta's gone to 3 defenders, and a big part of that is because Declan Rice will run back if they counter-attack.
Yeah. You think of that one, was it Jacob Murphy that he blocked out? Yeah.
But then, we didn't start him against Forest, we didn't start him last night. So it's a bit like, you've done a game and a half's worth of running at Newcastle, we got the players to sit you down.
But that, for me, that's part of the value of Mikel Merino. That I get why people are not excited by him or enthused by him in in sort of creative terms or whatever, but he showed his value at Newcastle with a great goal. Nobody made more chances against Olympiacos last night, apart from Martin Odegaard, than Mikel Merino. And what Mikel Merino allows you to do is sit Declan Rice down. So you don't have to play him game after game after game after game. And that, for me, is the value. And when you're winning games, it's just sort of like, okay, that's fine. It's when you, let's say, lose a game with Mikel Merino in the team that sort of changes the direction of that discussion, which I think is a little bit binary. But for me, I can see the value in a player like that. And look, when you look at the squad and the contribution so far over the course of this season, the two players with the most goals and assists between them are Martinelli and Trossard. 4 goal contributions. Gyokeres has 3, Eze has 3, I think Calafiori has 3. This is what you build a squad for. Nights like last night and games like Bilbao are what you build this squad for. You want all of these players. They're not just like safety nets. They're, as you say, tools in the toolbox that you can use to elicit results and performances, and which in turn, let's say when you go into a game this weekend against West Ham, means that you put Rice out and you can play him from the start. And Odegaard's played himself into the first team, and Trossard had a game, so he doesn't mind sitting down because Eze is going to play on the left. All of those things I think are really interesting. Saka, another one, for example, who only played a little bit last night. Let me circle it back around to the game, because it looked like it would be routine for Arsenal. Having scored early, we were on top. But Champions League football is quite tricky. Ask Manchester City about last night, for example. Olympiacos, I don't know if we underestimated them or didn't give them enough credit, to be honest. They caused us some problems. I think the delivery from their right back, by the way, Costinha, the consistency of the delivery he put in the box last night made me I don't know anything about him really, but I'd be like, if I was a scout, I'd be going, that guy's got something. One of those deliveries resulted in a chance for Daniel Podence, which David Raya saved. And at the time I looked at it and said, that's a fucking great save. Yeah. And then I saw the replays and I saw other replays, and it was even better. Every time you watched it, it was better. So these are the fine margins of Champions League games. You've got to stay on top of the opposition. You've got to take your chances. If you don't take your chances, you've got to be prepared to defend well. And if you can't defend, if you've got a goalkeeper as good as David Raya is, then you give yourself a great chance to keep clean sheets and keep the opposition at bay. We can talk about Raya in a sec if you like, but what Olympiacos did in the first half was cause us a few problems, and then in the second half they pressed much higher. We found it much more difficult to play through the lines. Arteta made changes, and actually I think one of the best moments we had in that second half was a Trossard chance, but it came from Declan Rice, if you remember, like holding off about 3 players and then playing the most sort of pinpoint pass to Odegaard in midfield, who brought it forward. Trossard had the chance. Keeper actually made a really good save. But that's how difficult it was for us to cause them problems in that second half. So I think they do deserve quite a bit of credit for making life that tough for us.
Yeah, definitely. And like when you play in the Champions League as well, you're playing teams who are used to dominating teams. So Olympiacos, win the Greek league every single year. I think they're top at the moment. They're used to dominating games, so they know how to attack. And they have so yes, they will have a right back who's probably quite attacking because that's what they need 95% of the time.
Sure.
So, and you look at kind of, without sounding disparaging, like clubs like this in the Champions League, one of them always ends up with a 50, 60, 70 million player that ends up somewhere. They've all got at least 1 or 2 players, And actually, it's quite interesting. I watched the Galatasaray Liverpool game on Tuesday night, and it's actually one of the things I really enjoy about watching a Turkish team is because obviously I don't watch Turkish football, but you watch a Champions League game with a Turkish team, and it's like, oh, I forgot about him. Yeah. And it's like Lucas Torreira and Davinson Sanchez, and it's like, oh, it's like a 2018 Premier League kind of fantasy team or something. And you get so I saw like Daniel Podence last night, and I was like, oh, that's the guy that played for Wolves. Like, I forgot about him.
Yeah.
So you get like a little collection of those players, but then you'll get a player, like Costinha, for example, where it's like, oh, actually, he looks like a player, and like it feels like he might go somewhere in the Premier League next season. I know that's a very Premier League centric way of looking at it, but that is just the reality of the economics of football in 2025. So all of these players will have players that can play. They will have goal scorers that know where the net is. Look, we bought one, right? We played one last night who played for Sporting Lisbon last season. So you do, even if you play within yourself a little bit, like they'll know where the goal is, and they'll have someone who can whack one in from 30 yards given the chance. And actually, our record at home to Olympiacos not very good. Before this game, I think we'd lost the last 2 times we played them at the Emirates. So, and like the save from Raya, I mean, I feel like he does this a lot. Was it the Leeds game? Did he make a really good save at either 0-0 or 1-0?
Yeah.
Which, like, I can't even remember it now because, like, he made the save and we went and won like 5-0, so it's fine. Like, but I feel like if you stop and think about it, that happens quite a lot. Mm-hmm. And one of those qualities I think that really marks out top goalkeepers is that kind of, I might only have one save to make, but it's going to have to be a worldie. And the save Raya made, I mean, it was down my end. I'm slightly more towards the north end. And that was, like, I tried to watch it back, but I couldn't find the angle properly because it feels like Raya must have started diving before the connection with the ball, because I just can't get over how quick his reflexes were. Like, not just the athleticism to do it, but the anticipation. Like, I feel like he must have started diving before the guy even hit the ball, because I don't understand how else he'd have got there. And I think with Raya, like, obviously there's a lot of focus on his distribution and things like that, which I think is absolutely right.
And it was a team like amazing last night, by the way. His passing was superb.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's the variety of his distribution as well. And again, Lewis wrote about this in his piece about the Newcastle game, about how he didn't hit any medium passes because, like, obviously Arsenal had a plan, like, don't put the ball in their midfield because it's, it's like a chipper in there, basically. Like, your ankles will get hacked off. So all of his passes were either very short or very long. And that's just like the versatility he gives you in distribution as well, in that he can do both things very, very well. And obviously a big part of why we signed him is how he takes crosses and things like that. But it feels like every few games he makes a world-class save or double save or something. And often it's the only thing he really has to do in terms of making saves. To be fair, he's very involved. And maybe that helps, the fact that he's almost like another midfielder sometimes or another centre-back, and he gets a lot of touches. Maybe that kind of helps in keeping his focus sharp. But I think... I kind of think it's almost like a good thing and a bad thing. Like, we don't talk about him, and I feel like we should, but I also feel like, cliche alert, a good goalkeeper is like a good referee. Like, they should just be there, and you shouldn't have to talk about them, and because you're just like, it's not a discussion point,
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. I wish we'd have some referees that we didn't see and talk about, but that's a pipe dream, really. It was the Forest game, I think, when he made that good save. It was Chris Wood who chested the ball over him, and he made a fingertip save for that one. But yeah, I mean, he's absolutely fantastic. And second half, he made a very good save as well. The speed of his reflexes are amazing. The game was tight, and when it's 1-0, you're never quite sure how it's going to pan out. And as you say, we've had some tricky moments and some tricky late moments. People will remember against Olympiacos in previous European games, albeit in the Europa League a few seasons ago. And they did put 2 strikers on, and we did lose Gabriel, which again, in previous seasons, when you see Gabriel go off, you start to worry a lot, but credit to Christian Mosquera. He came on and did a job. He was asked to come on and defend, and he did that. He wasn't really on the ball, but he got involved defensively. And then we make the game safe very late. I think your point about Martinelli drifting into positions that you don't normally see our right winger in is certainly evident here as well, because Bukayo Saka's in the sort of inside left channel. I think he took a shot, it rebounded out, Odegaard plays a pass, and the finish maybe a bit unlucky, a bit unfortunate for a goalkeeper who had been very, very good. But Saka, a great example of, if you don't buy a ticket, you don't win the lottery. Pull the trigger. How many times have we talked about that in the past about Arsenal players and the need to, at least just try. You just never know what might happen, rather than looking for that sort of Goldilocks opportunity in front of goal where everything is just right. Here's a great stat from Orbinho. Bukayo Saka has 17 goal involvements in just 19 Champions League appearances for Arsenal, 11 goals and 6 assists. And I'm pretty sure I saw a stat somewhere that said only 3 players have more European goals for Arsenal than Bukayo Saka, which is
has he
insane.
Surpassed Robert Pires or something?
Yeah, I think so.
I read this morning, and that's incredible. And again, we don't really talk about it. It's just so normal for Saka to score, even when he only gets a few minutes. And
he's just level from James Benge on Blue Sky. He's level with Robert Pires for Champions League goals. It took Pires 63 games. And this is his 19th game for Arsenal. So, I mean, it's
good company.
When you say we don't talk about it, I'm not saying any of us take Bukayo Saka for granted, because, how can you? But at the same time, the level of output that he has had over the course of his Arsenal career, albeit with a couple of fallow little spells because of the injury last season, etc., it is remarkable, isn't it?
It really is. And it's like, it's almost like remarkably unremarkable, basically. It's the same deal, like just talking about with Raya. We just expect it. And again, I wrote about this a couple of years ago. I think there is something about Saka that just kind of washes over you. He's such a I don't want to say functional player, but there's no real bows or whistles. Do you know what I mean? There aren't step overs, or he doesn't bash people about. Everything's just efficient and smooth, and you almost don't notice it, basically, because what he's doing is not doesn't look like really big physical. It's almost like that, the analogy of the swan, right? Just gliding across the lake. If you look under, their legs are going like the clappers, and that's what Saka's like. He's like a swan. It looks so easy that we take it for granted. But I think the other thing that was really interesting about the goal, though, and again, where I sit, I can see Arteta a lot, because kind of directly opposite where I sit. And he's often waving his arms about and stuff, so often catches my eye. But he swapped Saka and Eze very, very quickly after they came on. And again, he was frantically kind of, waving his arms about to swap them over for the last few minutes or so. It would actually be really interesting to understand why he did that. I mean, it worked. And, Saka scores from the left, basically. But I think that's something to keep an eye on. Potentially, because we never saw that before, really. We never saw it was always Saka is on the right.
Yeah.
And as well as it looking like he has a bit more freedom to drift, with 10 minutes to go against Olympiacos, Arteta decided to swap him and Eze over. And I think that's quite an interesting development. Maybe it's something that only happens in this game. Maybe they just saw something in, the Olympiacos right back or whatever. But it's something to put a pin in. And I mean, the idea of Saka on the left wing, for me, fine with me. I'd be fine with him as a number 10. He's such an incredible player.
Yeah.
And he is the franchise player, he is, I think, the player more than anyone else that all our hopes and dreams are pinned on. And I await that contract signing and announcement with great relish.
Yes, me too. I mean, I've got recollections of Saka scoring goals from that position before, going across the goalkeeper. So it's not uncommon for him. And obviously he played left back in the past, and he has played on the left in the past as well. But again, if we're talking about variety, if we're talking about unpredictability, putting players in positions where the opposition don't expect them to be is certainly part of that. So maybe it is something that we'll see over the course of the week, or of the weekend. I was going to say maybe the weekend, but hopefully over the course of the season. So look, I think overall, professional, solid, 2-0, 3 points, clean sheet, and in this sort of elongated Champions League format, that is just kind of job done territory, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I think as well, like, we know in terms of the Champions League that there are harder tests to come, and probably like a more difficult test behind us as well with the game at Athletic. I think it was really important to start with those kind of 6 points. A bit like last year when, you know, we had those kind of early games and we knew Inter away was coming. Like, I think we started Atalanta away last year, probably very similar to Athletic. Then, you know, PSG at home kind of took them apart. But we knew there was like Sporting away, there was Inter away. I think it's similar this time. We know that there's games where, you know, we could drop a couple of points. You know, we might lose one of them. And I think like a lot of clubs, elite clubs, will be getting to grips with what's needed in the league phase. I think it was a real unknown last year. And maybe now they know a little bit more, even just when it comes to like the extra games in January. And, you know, we've got that last home game, which if you've never been to the Emirates and you've never been able to get a ticket, you and 10 friends will get a ticket for that.
Yeah,
one.
put the date in your diary for Kairat Almaty.
Yeah, like that, you know, that's, I mean, I hope that has a real Europa League feel, because we're through and we've done what we need to do. But you kind of, with all due respect, stick a pin in that one and kind of say, even if we need points, you know, we ought to be able to do that. So I think there's a real kind of rhythm emerging with these games. I even think someone made a point in jest that I saw online, maybe on Twitter, where like Galatasaray had put up, like, you know, the English language accounts of a lot of these European clubs are very like banterific and all of that.
Yeah.
And, you know, they'd had a pop at Liverpool, and someone kind of made the point that there's this weird dynamic in the Champions League now where you don't play those teams twice. So someone like Galatasaray can have a bit of a laugh at Liverpool because they're not going to play them again.
Well, so until potentially later in the competition, when that shit might come back to bite you in the arse, you know?
Well, absolutely. And but yeah, like even just having that kind of, we don't play these again, like, so we move on to completely different opponents. And I think there is like a real kind of rhythm emerging around some of these games. And last night I think was really useful for us as well, in terms of maybe switching our mindset to a different phase of the season where we should be looking to pick up points, and again just like some routine home wins that are quite forgettable. Like, we've kind of got to get into that mindset now after a really difficult start. Yeah,
I mean, the next Champions League game is Atletico Madrid at home. Tough fucking game. Look at what they did to Real Madrid at the weekend. So yeah, it does make this group stage quite interesting. But, you know, the sort of tough games like Atletico, Bayern Munich at home, Inter away, sandwiched between games where on paper you expect Arsenal to go and win and do well. So we'll see how it plays out. A couple of quick things to sort of just get us out of here. You mentioned the contract for Bukayo Saka, which we all hope is you know, close to completion. I don't know that it is exactly yet, but hopefully there are no complications in that regard. But we did officially get the announcement of William Saliba this week, putting pen to paper on a new deal. Spoke really well, I think, about what he wants to achieve at this football club, and that he never considered the idea of leaving because he hasn't won anything here yet. And I do think that's really interesting. And I made this point maybe on last week's pod and certainly in the blog about how when a player like Saliba is committing the best years of his career to your club, then that tells you what kind of shape your club is in and what kind of shape your team is in and what these big, important, world-class players think about their chances of winning things. But I've completely forgotten the point and the question that I was going to ask. So I don't know what's going on there in my mind. This is like forgetting
Let's
Shakhtar.
just talk about William Saliba signing contract. Good.
Yeah, it is good. There was a wider point I was going to make, but fuck it. It is just great news, isn't it, for Arsenal? And I think what I was going to say was, we've lived through eras where our best players, we were always worried about them going somewhere else, because I think we could always see that however much it might hurt, there was probably a footballing justification for these really good players to say, you know what, if I want to win trophies, I got to go somewhere else. And that's a painful thing to come to terms with. And maybe the player gets the brunt of that because you're sort of shooting the messenger, as it were. But now, Gabriel, Saliba, signing on the young players, hopefully Saka to come, that's a change, and a really, really positive change.
Absolutely. And look, part of it's down to economics as well of the Premier League, like the days of Real Madrid and Barca being able to buy your players. It's not that easy anymore. Real Madrid, they're doing free transfers now. Like, I don't worry about a bid from them for Saliba because I'm not sure they could get to the number that would make us even remotely consider it. The fear there was, is he going to run down his contract and are they going to get him on a free? But like Barca can't buy him. So some of that external threat is gone. And so there is the question of where do you go? Like, where would you go to guarantee trophies? Like maybe Man City, but like we're competing with them.
Bayern or PSG, I guess. But those are empty trophies anyway, aren't they, really?
Yeah, exactly. Like, okay, you can go and win. And maybe someone like William Saliba might like to win Ligue 1 at some point, but it kind of feels like he could very much do that later in his career if he wanted to. But so there is kind of that question of, well, where would you go? That's like more of a certainty than Arsenal. I'm not saying we're a certainty because we've not really done it yet, but there aren't many greater certainties. But I think also what it kind of shows is for all the external noise around Arsenal, some of which is very tiring and frankly and quite difficult to deal with, these young guys who aren't online 24/7 and surprise, actually the way you communicate with some of these guys and the way you get their buy-in is probably not the same way that you get buy-in from people who spend all day on the internet.
Say that again.
It shows you as well that for all the external noise, it shows you what the internal perception is.
Yeah.
And actually, I think it's a great credit to the manager who has nearly been here 6 years now. It's a long time he's been in charge, that his message is still getting through and it's still resonating. And Saliba's been here longer than most of the team as well. Mm-hmm. So if like guys like him and Saka, who basically, I know Saliba went out on loan and stuff like that, but have been there longer than most of the team, are still bought in, are still, on board with his message.
Sure.
I think that says a lot about Arteta, not just as a coach, but as a communicator. And again, for all the external noise around it, it shows you the people who spend the most time with him and under him are trusting him with their careers. Yeah,
absolutely. I think academy players aside, Saliba and Martinelli are the two longest serving players at the club right now.
Yep.
They both arrived in the summer of 2019, didn't they? So,
yeah,
so there you go. Well, one final thing, and this is a quick point I want to make, and I'm sort of happy to make it in the context of Arsenal winning at Newcastle and refereeing decisions not being sort of not used, but like if you talk about refereeing decisions, people will say, well, you're making excuses. You've got to go and win the games. That's what champions do, blah, 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 blah. But, that shit is out of your hands. And it was out of our hands on Sunday against Newcastle. My firm opinion is that Arsenal should have had a penalty. I don't believe the justifications for not giving the penalty from PGMOL and Howard Webb stand up, particularly when you see some of the explanations and videos doing the rounds of Howard Webb explaining different decisions which seem to like directly contradict the sort of process, if you like, of the decision making that we saw at St. James's Park on Sunday. And I think another thing to say is that when we discuss refereeing and refereeing standards, we ought not, as much as possible, to apply them only to Arsenal. So when we see bad refereeing in other games, as much as it might amuse us to see Manchester United get a penalty but not see the opposition player sent off for a very obvious denial of a goal-scoring opportunity, we can laugh at that at the time. But we have to say that is really bad refereeing. It's terrible for the game that decisions like that take place. For example, when a Chelsea player kicks a Brighton player in the head in the box and they somehow don't give a penalty, we have to say that's also bad refereeing and bad decision-making. But the sort of wider point I want to make is that if rules and actual rules are being applied on a consistent basis, you could look at the Viktor Gyokeres incident on Sunday and say, well, I might think it's a penalty, but based on this and based on this and based on the actual rules of the game, I can see why that was not a penalty. But when the rules appear to be different from one season to the next, from one game to the next, or the rationale in the mind of officials and the head of the official, the PGMOL, like you have to ask questions about that, because they're either rules or they're not rules, or they're vibes. So how are games being officiated and decided on?
Yeah, take this kind of back to the beginning of Howard Webb kind of taking the role at PGMOL, and I understand I never shared this view, but there was a big view that under Mike Riley there was no communication from PGMOL. It felt very ivory tower and all of that. But personally, it was like that, but I think that nobody actually wants to hear from referees. So I think Howard Webb has clearly come in thinking, okay, I'm going to change that. I'm going to be more public facing. We're going to communicate about this stuff and all of that. However, what I think it's veered into very quickly is, that TV show he does with Michael Owen. Not exactly Jeremy Paxman there, is it? Like If you just reattune your head to the idea that the point of that show is that Howard Webb is on TV, then you kind of start to feel maybe not better about things, but that's sense. Why it exists.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, that's why it exists. So I'm of the opinion that even if it was erudite, educational, that like there was a genuine move to say, actually, I can see why people disagree with this, but from a referee's point of view, maybe he was thinking this and all of that. And I think there could be a use for that. But largely, I think fans don't want to hear it. And I think that's kind of on us as well. We're a bit intransigent. So if we think we've been screwed by a ref, and even if the head of PGMOL does come up with an erudite explanation, which he hasn't in this scenario, and very seldom does, but I just kind of think we don't want to hear it. It's just like, we had a penalty, you took it away from us, go away. That's our kind of point of view, and I think we're difficult to communicate with anyway. However, what this communication has turned into, and I think it's very, very clear from most of Howard Webb's kind of innovations, they're about centering referees, they're about centering himself. He clearly doesn't see officiating as a support structure, an incredibly valuable one, like you don't get a game without a referee. But he doesn't see it as a support structure. He sees it as central to the drama, to the narrative, to the plot. And I think he's hanging referees out to dry a little bit. Thankfully, we haven't seen it at all. But even that kind of thing they were going to bring in this season, where they were going to do time, how long goalkeepers hold on to the ball for. And there was supposed to be something like a hand signal from the referee, imitating a clock. It's like, Who wants that? And least of all, which referees want to be doing that? Because you'd look stupid, which is probably why it hasn't happened. But also, it's just like what's already a very difficult job. He seems to be piling more and more on them. And it's like, right, now you've got to really crack down on time wasting. You've got to crack down on this. You've got to crack down on that, on stuff that I actually don't think that many people really care about. Like, even when Arsenal are on, quote unquote, the wrong end of it, when the opposition goalkeeper catches a cross or something in the last minute and we need a goal, I don't really care that they hold on to the ball. Like, I kind of check out at that moment. It's like, oh, goalkeeper's got the ball. This is probably going to take 25 seconds. Like, I kind of accept it. So I don't really understand.
Because
like,
we
where
do
a
it.
lot of, yeah, exactly. I want David Raya to do it, and he does.
Exactly.
But it's like, I kind of accept that as part of the game. And it's like, so where's this crackdown coming from? Who's asking for this? And the kind of Occam's razor conclusion is just that Howard Webb is a bit of an egomaniac, and he wants to be on TV. He wants to be a very central character in this Premier League drama. And I kind of think he's putting that on referees as well. And I don't know how much the referees themselves actually want or appreciate that.
Yeah, I was going to ask, I was going to say, I think the idea of referees announcing their VAR decisions over the PA in a stadium is clearly part of that.
Yeah.
How many referees want to stand there and the whole place goes silent, and then you have to wait for your mic to come on and go, well, after a review, no foul. And everyone's like, you fucking fucker. Fucking fuck you. Anyway, listen, there are issues, and there have been issues. We're not going to solve them now, and we don't have time to solve them anyway, so we better leave it there for now. Tim, as ever, a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure as always.
Thank you very much indeed to Tim. You can find him on Blue Sky. He is at, what is he at? tim-stillman.bsky.social. tim-stillman.bsky.social. Of course, he's part of the Arsenal Vision podcast crew. You can find his new column on arseblog.com a little later on today, Thursday. Maybe it's even out by the time you're listening to this. And of course, Tim and the team bring you the best coverage of Arsenal women that you will find anywhere over on Arseblog News. Right. That is just about that for today's show. Thank you so much, as always, for listening. We will look ahead to the West Ham game in a bit more detail tomorrow over on Patreon. Quite an interesting game to preview, this one, given the last couple of results at home against West Ham and some of the things that we have to improve on in this season ahead. So myself and Lewis will talk about that and much more over on Patreon, patreon.com/Arseblog. It is just $6 a month to get access to all of the content that we do over there, as well as supporting everything that we put out on Arseblog and Arseblog News. Don't forget, the Arseblog apps for iOS and for Android have recently been updated. So if you want to get on board with those, go to the appropriate app store. I was going to say convenience store. That is not where you get apps. Maybe they could sell a few more if you were going in for like a newspaper, a Snickers, and an Arseblog app. Anyway, there's an idea for somebody. You can have it. I don't need it. Anyway, patreon.com/Arseblog for all of that. For now, take it easy, folks. Thank you so much, as always, for listening, and we will catch you on the next one. Until then, cheers. Bye-bye. Welcome back to Talk Shite Radio, talking shite about sport 24 hours a day. This week it emerged that Mikel Arteta's unconventional training ground methods had included a visit from the RAF in order to improve communication amongst his players. It's not the first time Arteta has tried something new. You remember the story about pickpockets? But do these methods actually work on players? Jamie O'Haha, veteran of 6 Premier League games with Spurs or thereabouts, what's your take?
Well, it's just really stupid, isn't it? Because, like, what does a fighter pilot know about the offside rule?
To be fair, Arteta said this was about improving communication on the pitch.
Yeah, but it's just really stupid, isn't it? Because what does a guy from the RAF know about the offside rule?
But split-second communication on the pitch could be the difference between creating a goal or not letting a goal in. So, do you see any benefit to this at all?
Well, I've thought about this a lot, you know, and I just think it's really stupid because what does a guy who flies planes know about the offside rule?
I'll be honest, I think we could do with some improved communication around here. Maybe we need to get somebody in to talk to you.
Like a fighter pilot?
I was thinking more of a remedial teacher, but we'll take whatever we can get at this point.
I don't know what that means.
This is Talk Shite Radio, talking shite about sport 24 hours a day. We're going to take a short break. When we return, as Ruben Amorim's Manchester United continue to struggle, we ask, is this the funniest thing ever?
Talk Shite Radio, talking shite about sport 24 hours a day. 24 hours a day.